Hey y'all. So, this is probably no surprise since you saw the title of this video, but this is a new topic that I'm broaching here. I've basically decided, I've been in this place where I haven't been reading. I started making content, focusing on books, and I started drifting away from that because I wasn't reading as much. I was making videos about music and stuff, and I just have sort of decided to just fully embrace it and say, whatever, I have a lot of passions and things that I love, and, whatever sort of things I feel like talking about or geeking out about, that's what I'm going to make videos about. And so, one of my biggest passions in my life is gaming. And I've been, a video gamer for my whole life. But also, since a child, I have enjoyed tabletop gaming. I was an avid Magic the Gathering player in the 90s and early 2000s when I was a child. I played Warhammer as well back in that era. And like most children, I played board games and stuff. And then I also, in that early 2000s, era, played some of the more tabletop game stuff. That was when I first played Catan. It was probably in 2001, 2002. I was also a big fan of Axis and Allies and other things like that. And then I kind of took an extended period away from tabletop gaming until I got into college, and I basically what ended up happening was my partner at the time, her parents were very big into board games, but they played pretty, standard, like the things you would think of as being in most American households. But so we were going to get them a board game for Christmas. This would have been in 2011, and I suggested we get them Catan, which I had not, at that time, I hadn't played in a number of years. And so we got them Catan, played it, and we had a rip-roaring good time, played a lot of Catan, and then I, fell down the rabbit hole, right? And so that was, finding things that in 2011 were, the sort of height, the pinnacle of gaming at that time, stuff like Pandemic, stuff like Dominion. But in the last 10 years since then, board gaming has grown a lot. It is sort of snowballed and just absolutely gone bonkers. And it feels like there's so much innovation and exciting new things happening all the time in the world of board games. It's hard to keep up. When I was employed, full time and could afford it, I would go to board game conventions. They have one, a smaller one here in town in Minneapolis, every year called Con of the North, which is it's small, but it's fun. And then my friend Ben and I, for a couple of years, we were going out to Madison, Wisconsin, which for those maybe not in the area, it's about a 4-hour drive, for Gamehole Con, which is a much larger board game convention. Not the biggest in America by any stretch of the imagination. There are much bigger ones like PAX, the Penny Arcade Expo, and of course Gen Con, the very famous one in Indiana that was founded by Gary Gygax, the co-creator of Dungeons and Dragons. But Gamehole Con, it's a lot of fun. It's very big. You get to try out games you haven't seen yet. You get to meet developers. I got to play Betrayal at House on the Hill Legacy with Rob Daviau, the man who designed it, as well as some of the people who wrote for it, which is very cool. I got to meet Eric Lang, the guy who created Blood Rage and Rising Sun. I got one year we were there both times I was there I got to meet Patrick Rothfuss, the author, which is very cool, and I got to see him play Dungeons and Dragons with Matthew Mercer and a number of other nerd celebrities. Very cool. Anyways, all this rambling is just to say that board games are a big passion of mine, a big love of mine. I've had pipe dreams for years of making one. I really like narrative board games, and I've always thought it would be really cool and fun to make a sort of narrative game. I don't know if it'll ever happen, but it would be cool if it did. But anyways, I just thought I would do a little primer. I've been basically the pandemic, winding down. Not to say that it's over, but it does feel like it's winding down or reaching a point where things are starting to go back to normal. I've been getting to play games again, after a very long time of not getting to play games, or if I was playing them, only really doing it like remote, which is not nearly as much fun. So I've been getting to play a lot more games, which is great. There were a number of games that had come out and I had acquired like during the pandemic that I had been, anxiously waiting to play for a long time, that I've now been able to get to the table, and it's really like reinvigorated my love of gaming and gotten me really excited and all antsy and stuff. And there's a few things that I've played that could make it into this list in the future. It's hard to say, and it's like there are things that have been. I'm sure I've titled the video something like my top 10 or my perfect 10s. It just so happens that on Board Game Geek, which is the website for board games, you can rate games from 1 to 10, and I looked at how many games I have given a 10, and it is exactly 10. So I was like, oh, perfect, top 10, but not in any particular order. So let's go through them. I lied. It's 11. It's 11 games. Okay. So the first one I don't have to show, unfortunately. There are two that I won't be able to hold up and show you, which is too bad, but that's okay. The first one is Pandemic Legacy Season 1. So Pandemic is a game that came out in 2008 and became very popular. It's one of the most popular board games of the last 20 years. And it is a cooperative game where you play as a team of scientists who are trying to stop a series of global pandemics, 4 different diseases that are spreading across the globe, and you are in a race against time to stop them from getting out of control, create a cure, and administer it so that you can save the world. It's a very fun game. It's a very good game. It was one of the first cooperative board games that I ever played, which was like a very foreign concept to me. The first time I played it, the idea that like you either all win or you all lose together. It has a lot of issues with it that cooperative games can have. The biggest one being something that people refer to as quarterbacking, where basically one dominant player will sort of assume a role where they're telling everyone what to do, and then the other players kind of aren't really having fun because they're not really engaged in playing the game. So that's always a potential problem with games like this. But Pandemic Legacy, basically what that was a guy, Rob Davio, who I mentioned a little bit ago. He had been around designing games for a long time, but then in 2011 he created a board game called Risk Legacy. He was a big Risk head. And the idea of Risk Legacy was that you played a campaign of games of Risk where the game would be permanently altered as you played it. Cards would be ripped up and destroyed. The board would have things written on it, or stickers would be applied to reveal new areas or destroy areas where things previously were. It would persist throughout the time you played it, and you would play it a set number of times, and then it would end, basically. And this became a very big thing, a big idea, but it didn't really like fully kick off into like the zeitgeist of gaming until Pandemic Legacy came out in 2015, which was Matt Leacock, the man who made Pandemic, teamed up with Rob Davio, the man who created the idea of the Legacy game, and they created this first in what has now been 3 Pandemic Legacy games, where they basically took the structure, the basic, idea of Pandemic, and then created it into a campaign game that you play over the course of 12 to 24 sessions, and then it ends, and then you're done. And so some people, they hear that and they say, well, why would I want a game that I can only play a limited number of times? And the answer from the designers was, it's not meant to be a game that you can only play 12 to 24 times. It's a game that you want to play at least 12 to 24 times, that you will actually play that many times. Which, for people who collect board games, that's a very real thing. I have many games that I have not played that many times. So, it presents a narrative, a story that takes place over the course of a year. Each month is a session. You play it. If you win, you move on to the next month. If you lose, you have a second chance. But if you lose a second time, then you still move on to the next month. So, therefore, 12 to 24 games. And you're still the same basic idea. There are diseases you're trying to cure, but the things that it introduces are, like, if you allow diseases to get out of control, then it destabilizes the cities. As cities destabilize and descend into rioting, it makes it harder to move around the board because your transportation is cut off. You can lose cities entirely. There's even a card late in game where you can nuke a city and just take it off the board as like a last-ditch kind of move. And then as you progress through the campaign, there are boxes and envelopes and things that you will open, and they will introduce new mechanics that change the way you play the game. There will be new winning conditions that will change the goals that you have every time you play, but the core remains the same. I just remember the first time I played through this game, it was like I had really liked Pandemic a lot, and I was, in a place where I was getting more and more and more into board gaming. And when this came out, I was really excited about it. And 2015, I got it for Christmas that year, and it was the year that my wife and I were living in Syracuse, so we had come home to Minnesota for like 2 weeks, week and a half or something like that. And I got the game, and we went home. We went back to my parents' house where we were staying, the two of us, and we broke it out, and we started playing it. And we played it, and we were playing it, and we were playing it, and we were playing it until 6 a.m. And after we were like a third or halfway through the campaign, we were like, well, if we just finish the whole thing, then we don't have to like bring it on the plane back with us, which would be good. So we did. We just sort of, it's the first time it's like when you binge a show. Like, we binged this game, and it was insane. It was incredible. I had never had a board game sort of surprise me the way that it's a narrative thing, so there are twists, there are betrayals, there are unexpected things that happen. You open a box, it's like Christmas, you find new components and things, and you get excited because you have to figure out how you integrate them into everything's already there, and you're rethinking about how you play the game. And it was just incredible. And Legacy has been done, a lot since. There are, like I said, 2 more Pandemic Legacies, Season 2 and Season 0, which is a prequel. I have played Season 2. It is very good, but not as good. I have not played Season 0 yet, but I do want to. But it came out during the pandemic, so I haven't gotten a chance to play it yet. And there have been other, Jamie Stegmaier made Charterstone, which was a Legacy worker placement game, which I enjoyed, but it didn't, blow my mind. And then also Rob Daviau did the Betrayal Legacy, which I really liked a lot, but other people maybe didn't like as much, but I enjoyed that a lot. And there's people still, to this day, pushing, doing new things with Legacy. Like, for instance, in Charterstone, which I mentioned, there's a point where you open a box and it has a little tea candle in it, and the instructions for that round of the game are that you have to light the candle as you start, and basically if you don't finish the game before the candle burns out, then something bad happens, which is really crazy. Just oh my god, wow, it's so cool. So if you like Pandemic, I cannot recommend Pandemic Legacy enough. It is just a fantastic, wonderful, amazing, perfect game. Pandemic Legacy, just to give you an idea, of that it's not just me saying these things necessarily. It is currently rated an 8.6 out of 10 with 44,000 ratings on Board Game Geek, placing it as the number 2 overall best board game of all time, according to voters of the site. And a copy of it will run you a breezy $79.99 at your local game store. The second game on my list is one that is very popular and has been around for a pretty long time compared to most of the games on this list. It's the second oldest game on this list. Came out in 2010, and it is Seven Wonders by Antoine. This game, like I said, came out in 2010. As you can see here, it won the Kennerspiel des Jahres, which is the second prize at the Essen board game convention, which is the largest board game convention in the world. It is in Essen, Germany. Annual attendance around 300,000 people for that convention. So the Spiel des Jahres is the big prize. It's one of the most prestigious awards in board gaming, but the Kennerspiel is still very prestigious. And you can see down here it's got a bunch of other awards and stuff. So this game is one of the most popular and well-liked modern board games. It is a card drafting game where you are each in charge of an ancient civilization centered around one of the seven wonders of the world, of the ancient world. And basically you will be dealt a hand of cards, and cards will either provide you with a resource that you can then use to build other cards, or they will give you some other sort of benefit. Benefits can be you can build monuments that are worth victory points at the end of the game. You can create armies, which you will then use to compare your army strength against the players sitting next to you, and whoever has a stronger army at the end of each round will get victory points at the end of the game. There will be various other things, and then money is involved as well, which some cards cost money, some cards just cost resources. But the thing is that every turn you've got a hand of cards. You pick one to keep and play, and then you pass the rest of them to the player next to you. So you're not only thinking about what am I going to do, where am I going, but you're also thinking about how can these other players use the cards that I'm passing to them. Do I want to give this card away, even though I don't necessarily need it as bad as this other card? One of the complaints about this game is that it's kind of there's not a lot of interaction. You're thinking about somewhat what other people are doing, but for the most part, you've got a puzzle in front of you that you're trying to solve, right? And you're trying to maximize your what you're doing. It's pretty hands-off, though, in terms of player interaction. Very little player interaction, which exemplifies the European style of board games, generally speaking. People categorize board games as either European or American in style. Colloquially, gamers refer to them as Euro games or Ameritrash games. Ameritrash sounds mean, but it is sort of a loving moniker. Ameritrash games are much more thematic and narrative, and involve a lot more chance or perhaps chaos. Dice is a big staple of Ameritrash games. Basically, every board game that you think of as being a classic board game is an Ameritrash game. Catan, is people, maybe it's sort of like a doorway into a Euro, but it's not really a Euro because it's got dice and things and a lot of player interaction. Things that are, very, well-loved Euro games would be something like Agricola or other things like that, where, there's not a lot of player interaction. It's mostly about the mechanics are a puzzle that you have to solve, and whoever solves the puzzle the best is going to win the game. And often these games will, their theming or, what they're, about is really just sort of like window dressing just to, enhance the systems of the game, which is really what the game is about. I'm more of a thematic person, personally. I like thematic games a lot. I like narrative games a lot. So that's what my tastes skew towards. In this game, it's not a narrative game. It's not a thematic game. But I do like it a lot. I like it a lot. So, yeah, this one is fantastic, and I cannot recommend it enough. This is the first edition of this game. They did recently publish a second edition. This game does also have a number of expansions for it, some of which are pretty good, and some of which are not so good. That's kind of always the thing about expansions, especially with very popular games that end up getting a lot of expansions. Eventually, there's too many, and it just sort of bogs the game down. But there's some good expansion content out there, and so the current edition of this game will cost you retail $60 at your local game store. And on Board Game Geek, this game has a 7.7 out of 10 with 88,000 ratings, ranking it as the 73rd highest rated game on the site. The third game on my list is the other one that I don't have a copy of, and that's because I don't use the box for it. I keep it in long boxes, card long boxes, for space and ease purposes. And that is Dominion, the oldest game on this list, published in 2008, developed by Donald X. Vaccarino. This is the game that invented deck building, which is a sort of game mechanic that has become a staple of the gaming world. Basically, the idea is that you are each playing as a ruler over a sort of feudal land, and you are building things in your kingdom. Your kingdom is represented by your deck, and then at the end of the game, whoever has the most victory points will win. And so at the beginning of the game, you're given you're given 10 cards, 7 of which are money, copper, that you can use to buy cards, and 3 of which are victory point cards, which don't do anything, but they are worth victory points at the end of the game. And then in between the players is a shared store of 10 cards, which are selected, either predetermined or selected randomly, from a pool of 30, 40 possible choices in the base game, and many more with each expansion that you add. And these cards will cost money that your cards are worth, so you will discard money cards and then take one of the cards from the store and then put it in your discard pile. And the idea being that once you run out of cards and then shuffle your deck back together, now you're going to draw that card, and the card you can play to do something. Generally, what you are going to be playing is cards that will allow you to buy more cards at once, give you more money, or some variation on those things, or do other specialized things. So you're going to spend money to buy more powerful money so that the individual card is worth more, so that you can buy more expensive cards. There are also the victory point cards, which you will buy, and the more expensive victory point cards cost more money, but then you're also remembering that buying more of the smaller cards is going to gum your deck up with cards that don't do anything and you can't actually play. It's a delicate balance. You've got to learn how to balance the deck. There are cards that will remove cards from your deck, which is important as you get further along in the game, so you can get rid of cards that are less valuable to you and are gumming up your deck, so that you can optimize the deck so that you're drawing the cards you need more quickly and more frequently. It's really a satisfying and exciting puzzle. Again, not a lot of player interaction. There's a little bit, but not a lot. And most of the player interaction is especially in the base game, is optional. It comes through cards that are called curses, which will do a negative thing to another player, but you can play without those cards if you choose to. There are so many expansions for Dominion, and I've played 4 or 5 of them, and of those 4 or 5, 2 of them were really good, and the other ones were not that great. And generally, I think it suffers from what I was saying before about there just being so many expansions, just bloat. It's just too much. But if you get that core game and you really love it, and then you can pick up like the Seaside expansion and the Prosperity expansion, which are like the two ones that I really like, the ones that are considered to be the best generally, and that should keep you going for a long time. I don't know if this is the game I've played the most. It might be the game I've played the most of any board game ever. There were nights in college where me and my wife and our friend Bear would stay up until 7 in the morning, in the kitchen just playing round after round after round after round of Dominion. Just played it so much, and had a grand old time doing so. It's a lot of games that I was really into back then that early on in my board gaming time have not necessarily stood the test of time, but Dominion does and is. And there are a lot of other games that have done deck building since then, but there's something about the sort of simple purity of Dominion that really pleases my lizard brain in a way that a lot of other games don't necessarily. There are other deck building games that I like a lot, like Clank is a great example, or Star Realms, but I just still like Dominion more. So, yeah. Dominion currently has a 7.6 out of 10 with 80,000 ratings on Board Game Geek, making it the 102nd highest ranking overall game, and the current second edition of the game will run you a pretty breezy $44.95 at your friendly local game store. Alright, next we've got our first really big box, which is something of a theme. You will see I do like maximalism. Is Gloomhaven. Published in 2017 by Isaac Childress and his Cephalofair Games. I'm not going to hold this up the whole time because it's very heavy. Not only is that a huge-ass box, but I have the wooden packing insert to organize the game to make setting it up and tearing it down go faster, which makes it a lot heavier. I would guess that box weighs 20 pounds, if I had to venture a guess. So, Gloomhaven. This is, I will say up front, this is the big boy. This is the #1 ranked game on Board Game Geek of all time, and has been since it came out 4 years ago. It is, a massive, epic thing to behold. So what is it? It is a dungeon crawler game, much in the way if you ever played the classic game Hero Quest or any things like that, where you're on a map with little, squares. That's a dungeon, and you have a little figure, and you're moving through it, and there are monsters, and you're fighting the monsters, and there's chests, and you're looting the chests, and etc., etc. In that sort of high concept way, it is like that. But it is so much more than that. You have a massive campaign of quests that are story-driven, with lots of flavor text, in this world that's entirely its own creation, with all these different fantasy races and things and politics and everything you can imagine. And each player will pick a class that they will play as, which all play differently. And when you play, instead of, maybe a traditional way of playing, you have a hand of cards. And each card can do two different things. There's a top choice and a bottom choice. And on your turn, on everybody's turn, everybody at the same time silently picks two cards to play and then reveals them. And then they go in. The cards will also determine your initiative, so it determines the order that you play in that round. And then when it's your turn, you have to pick one card to do a top action from, and then the other card to do the bottom action from. and every quest is different. There are different goals and stuff. Usually the goal is like kill all the bad guys, but not every time. And so there are all these different classes, and each of them play differently. Like there's of course sort of classic tropes, like there's a fighter, there's a bard, there's a guy who summons hordes of rats that he can command. There's a dude who makes robots and fights with robots. There's magicians, like spellcasters. There's a guy who can control rocks with his mind and throw them at people. And at the beginning of the game, there are 6 classes for you to choose from. However, there are 18 total in the game. And you all will create characters in this class, and then each character that you create will be given a goal that's their life's objective. And when you, throughout the course of playing games of Gloomhaven, finally satisfy that goal, then your character's reason for questing and adventuring has been completed, and they choose to retire from their adventures. And when you do that, it unlocks a new class that you can add to your pool of selected classes you can play as. There are around 100 quests in the game, and quests can have different outcomes and branch, and completing quests will unlock new choices. Every time you sit down to play, you're in the city of Gloomhaven, and you have your sort of list of unlocked quests that you can choose from, and different stories are going in different directions and such like that. It's a very, very big, epic game that is very hard to describe, briefly, I would say. And it is so much fun. I had a play group, a group of like 4 guys, including me, who we named our, at the beginning when you start playing Gloomhaven, you have to name your party, and we named our party the Questy Boys, and that's like our group chat name for the 4 of us. And we play other games as well, but for a long time we were just playing Gloomhaven, playing it pretty often. But even as much as we played it, we probably got together to play Gloomhaven 15 times, I would say. And every time we did, we would probably play between 2 and 4 missions. Each mission takes like maybe 1 or 2 hours. But even then, we have not completed Gloomhaven. We've not finished it. We've not unlocked all the classes. There are still like 4 or 5 of the 18 classes that we have not unlocked, and I don't even know what they are. It is just such a big fucking game. It is incredibly big, and it is you get so much time out of it. And there's so many little things about it that are smart. I mean, I just barely scraped the surface of how you play the cards to choose what to do. It is so smart. It is so brilliant. And every time you get a new class, it's like a new puzzle that you have to solve. You have to figure out how to do the things you want to do, because as you level up, then you get new cards that you can change the cards that are in your deck and sort of customize it to the way that you like to play the character. And even just things like when you are on the road between the city and your quest, then there is a deck of events that are, you have to pull from, and then something's going to happen to you, and there's just so much. This game is, very well loved. As I said, it is the #1 ranked game of all time on Board Game Geek, but that love is not without its merits. I'm not a huge fantasy guy, but I was won over by the world of this game, and it is one of the most fun campaign games that you can get. And it is expensive, but the amount of enjoyment to money ratio, very high. Very, very high. It's not insanely expensive. It's about as much as maybe 2 or 3 normal games, but you are getting at least 2 or 3 times as much content out of it, I would say, easily. I've put 100 hours into this game and have not seen everything there is to see yet. So, I think that speaks for itself. Like I said, this game is the #1 rated game on Board Game Geek. It has an average rating of 8.8 out of 10 with 46,000 ratings, and a new copy of it at your local game store will set you back $140. If you're interested, but that's a bit of an ask, they did somewhat recently put out a new thing called Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion, which is a standalone expansion, meaning that you can either play it as its own self-contained game, or you can integrate it into the bigger Gloomhaven experience. And Jaws of the Lion features 4 new factions and about 30 quests. So you can just buy Jaws of the Lion and play through all of that, and if you like it, then get the big box, and Jaws of the Lion will only set you back about $50, and they sell it at Target, so you don't even have to, find a game store or whatever, if you don't want to. If you do like Gloomhaven, there are a few things that you can use to trick out the box. Like I said, I have a wooden insert. The one I have is from a company called Broken Token that is like the most popular board game insert company. However, they have recently had a number of controversies surrounding the owner and proprietor of Broken Token and his treatment of women. Not great. So I don't support supporting that company anymore, personally. But there are other organizers out there. This game is notorious for having a very long setup and teardown time, which is a definite struggle with it. There are a lot of little pieces and little working parts that you need to assemble, and there's a lot going on. But if you get the official helper app, the Gloomhaven Companion app that will keep track of the health and damage and things for the enemies, and then you get an insert that streamlines a ton of the stuff that is problematic about the game and makes the experience way better, in my opinion. So, yeah. It's another really big one. The biggest of big ones. I don't even know if I can get the whole box in frame. Oh! I can't. It's Kingdom Death Monster. It's Kingdom Death : Monster. This is a big-ass game that is extremely notorious in the board gaming world for being basically the definition of over-the-top and maximalist. Kingdom Death started as a series of scale miniatures models in resin in the late 2000s that were funded through Kickstarter by a man named Adam Poots. And eventually, he decided to, because of the success he was having, pounce on. He had this sort of world and lore behind these figures, and he decided he was going to go for it and make a game out of it. So he kickstarted Kingdom Death Monster, and it was a huge success, and quickly went out of print. And then he did another Kickstarter for edition 1.5 of Kingdom Death Monster, which was an even bigger success. And that's what I have here. I have the 1.5 edition. I did not partake in the Kickstarter because I couldn't afford to at the time, but I was able to buy the core game off of secondhand off of someone for very cheap shortly after they got it from the Kickstarter. I paid just over $200. Normally, Kingdom Death retails for $400. Yes, $400. That is not a mistake or a joke. It is a $400 board game. So anybody who is familiar with miniatures, games, and wargaming knows how expensive that shit is, Warhammer and things like that. And so that's, this is a hobbyist miniatures game, sort of combining the worlds of board gaming with that. And that is a big part of why it is as expensive as it is, because it has a ton of miniatures in it. And like when you are getting those high quality, Warhammer like hobbyist miniatures, they're coming on sprues, unpainted. You are cutting and gluing and assembling these miniatures yourself and painting them and making them pretty and nice. The game also has over 1,000 cards in it. It has a hardcover bound rule book that is like 300 pages long. It is just big. The board is bigger than my arms can show you in the frame. It is huge in every conceivable way. And because of that, it filters a lot of people out. Lots of people are never going to play this game because they can't afford it and they don't know anybody who can. But I am insane, and so I bought it anyway. Even though I had never played it, I paid all that money because I knew I was going to love it. I knew I was going to love it. And if I was ever hard-pressed and forced to pick a favorite game, it would be Kingdom Death. There are a few on this list that would come very close, but it would be Kingdom Death Monster. Not only is and I should add in, not only is the base game $400, there are currently 12 expansions for the game, 10 of which are new things that you fight, and 2 of which are separate additional things. And they range in price from $60 to $150 a piece, and they do sell them as a bundle for $800 for all of those expansions. However, the second Kickstarter, part of the Kickstarter was to produce over 20 additional expansions, in addition to the 12 that have already been published, in addition to the $400 core game. So there's a lot. There's a lot, and it is very expensive. And they also make tons of miniatures and stuff that don't have any game content. You just can buy just for fun, just because you like the art or whatever. And so, all of that being said, what is this game that costs so much money? Well, it is a survival fantasy horror game, dark fantasy, where you play as a small collective of survivors in a world of darkness where there is no light. But each of you has attached to you a sort of bioluminescent lantern, which allows you to see just a bit in that world of darkness, and is probably your soul or something like it. And in this harsh and unforgiving world, the only way that you can eat is by tracking a quarry, a monster, slaying it, and then taking its parts back to your settlement and doing stuff with them, basically. So the core of the game is a campaign. It is played over the course of approximately 30 lantern years, what they're called, or like game sessions. And each lantern year consists of 3 main phases. First, you will choose a quarry from the available ones. In the core box, there are 3 quarries in the main box. Or, on some years, you will have an enemy come to you. These are referred to as Nemesis, and there are 4 Nemesis in the core box. So 7 total things that you can fight. After you choose your what you're gonna, if you're going to go out and hunt a quarry, after you choose, then you have the hunt phase of the game, where there's a board, a tracker, and you will place your figures on one end of it and what you're hunting on the other, and then you will advance up the board representing you getting closer and closer, but at every space you will have some sort of an event happen. Sometimes you will have a deck, each quarry will have a deck of cards that are events specific to that monster, so you may have to pull one of those at random and see what happens. There is also the other spaces you will roll a D100 and then consult the rule book, where there is a list of 100 different random events that can happen, which you will have to make different skill rolls, and then good or bad things can happen depending on how you do. If you survive and get to catch up to the thing you were hunting, then you'll have the showdown phase, where you pull out the big ass board, you plop your monster down in the center of it, and then you put your little tiny people on there, and then you have to kill it. And it's hard. It's very fucking hard. Some of the biggest influences on this game were Dark Souls, Berserk, and Monster Hunter. So, you've got this huge thing that will just fuck you up, and you have to figure out how to kill it. And each monster behaves in very specific and interesting ways. And so a lot of the process of the game, sort of like Dark Souls, is a series of failing until you learn how to get good, right? Basically, each monster is a puzzle, and you have to learn their movements, their habits, and then you have to adapt your strategies to them until you perfect it and are able to take them down more easily. There's a lot of permanent death in the game. You start the game out with like a number of settlers, like between 8 and 12, I think, at the beginning. And one of the main things you need to do in the game is make sex so that you have more babies, because the most important resource that you have in the game is people, because if you run out of people, then the campaign ends, of course. So people are expendable. Do not fall in love with your creations, because they will die. And even if they don't die, they'll have things like, they'll get their guts ripped out and they won't be able to walk, or they'll have their leg blown off, or they'll have their dick blown off and they won't be able to fuck anymore. Or they'll be deafened and you can't shout commands at them anymore. There's a whole, just tons of systems here at work that are very nuanced and complicated. There's a lot of dice rolling. There's a lot of chance, things that people don't always like. But it creates these moments of incredible triumph and crushing defeat that are such high highs and low lows that really make the game what it is. I don't think this game would work without dice, personally. Because when you crit, it feels good. It feels real good. And you're only rolling a d10, so you got a 10% chance. So, for instance, one of the first times I played this game with friends, since this is a cooperative game, you can play it solo, and I've mostly played it solo. I've played it a lot solo, and I've played it a decent amount with other people. But we were playing the, introductory fight, which is against the White Lion monster. And we were very early into the fight, and every time you attack, you have to roll to see first if you hit. And then when you hit, if you do, you pull a card from the hit location deck, which will tell you where on the monster you hit. And then basically it'll be like, it'll give you a sort of difficulty for whether you actually hurt it or not. And then there will usually be like some sort of consequence where, like, if you do hit it, this thing will happen. If you don't hit it, this thing will happen. And then often there will be a crit where if you roll a 10, this extra thing will happen. And it just so happened that my friend Daniel pulled the hit location for the heart, and the text for that one says that if you crit on that, instant kill, you win the fight immediately. And he did. And it was awesome. Everybody was like, holy shit. And then, and they were very excited. And so we immediately set up, play again. and then they got fucking trounced, just slaughtered. Everybody died, right? High highs and low lows. And the game is known for being almost aggressively mature. There's a lot of nudity and sex and gore, and things like one of the hit locations for the lion is you can hit it in the dick and cut its dick, and if you crit on its genitals, you receive a pair of lion testicles, which is a card that you can use later in the game. So, if you survive the showdown phase, if you kill the monster and at least one of your 4 people is still alive, congratulations. You have felled the beast. You are then able to harvest a number of resource cards from the corpse of the monster, and then you bring those back to the settlement, where you have the 3rd phase of the game, the settlement phase. And this is where you're going to take the resources that you have gained and use them to craft new shit. So that's going to be armor, that's going to be weapons. There are some sort of like generic baseline like rawhide, leather armors, and then each monster has its own unique set of armor and weapons and items that you can craft from its pieces. One major problem with the game, I think, is that there is absolutely a best way to do this. There is a smart way to play. There is a correct way to choose what to fight and choose what to craft to maximize your likelihood of succeeding. And what that does, it's sort of a two-edged sword, because I found it to be fun to explore and try things out and see how things worked. I enjoyed that a lot. The downside is that once you figure it out, that playfulness is gone, and it's like you have a goal, you're doing your thing, you're getting your antelope teeth and gums, and you're crafting, your whatever, and that's just how it is. And that is not as fun. I do think that adding in expansions and more quarries and things is helpful in this, and then also expansions will often, the monsters will come in at different points in the game, so you can do something like, if you've been playing for a long time and you're mostly fighting lions and antelopes, which are the first 2 quarries that you fight in the game, you can buy the Gorm expansion, which will add in a 3rd quarry earlier in the game, which is fun. Another problem I've heard is that some of the expansions are significantly less good. They are not all created equal. Since there are 12 expansions, and like I said, they are very expensive, and also they are very infrequently in print. Usually they'll print some like once a year for their annual Black Friday sale, and then they'll sell out instantly, and then they're gone for the rest of the year. So I only have 2 of the expansions for this game, the Gorm and the Dung Beetle Knight. But anyways, this game is epic, it is incredible, it is dark, it is gross, it is gory, it is sexy, it is thematically like everything that I want. It's unfair, it's mean, it's hilarious, and it's got this incredible world of like body horror monsters that just rocks. I just love so much. I just want to pick Adam Pootz's brain so bad. He's just got so much. And once I read Berserk, I was like, oh, okay. So like clearly this is like, some there's some fan service going on here for Berserk. But even so, if you like Berserk, this game's world will be your thing. I guarantee it. And the mechanics of the game function a lot like Monster Hunter, where you're tracking a monster and then fighting it and then taking its pieces and crafting new stuff out of it. But tonally, it's not very similar to Monster Hunter at all, I don't think. Man, yeah. I mean, I don't know what else to say other than that. This game is just it's very clearly not for everyone. For instance, like the Dice Tower, the video game reviewing critic company that's headed by Tom Vassell, like those guys, I don't really like them very much. They're all kind of like they're very Tom particularly very Christian. Spent like 10 years as a missionary. Seems like a great guy, but basically, you know, they have talked about the game and basically been like, it's so explicit and gross that it's a non-starter for them, because it's like it's got tits in it and dicks in it. It's just like they're just not even gonna go there, and that's. But for me, I'm like, you know, I'm all for it. So. Bring on the nude, and there's some people criticize it because they view it as having like a sort of male gaze. There's a lot of female nudity, and then there's also they make like special models that are pin-up versions of characters inspired by like 50s and 60s pin-up art. So they'll make like pin-up versions of various monsters that are sort of like nude women themed after the monster. But they do also make pin-up male figures, and I will say that the male characters in the game are also pretty hypersexualized. And it's the sort of like everyone is like a fucking Roman god cut from stone, chiseled, huge tits, huge ass, huge dick, huge abs, like perfect six-pack. You know, it's clearly meant to be fantasy, right? But it's like fun fantasy, and some people sort of struggle with the depiction of women. I think that, you know, celebrating sexuality and sexiness shouldn't be thought of as anti-woman, personally. But you know, I get it. I do get it. So, and the price tag, of course, is gonna, you know, be a huge, you know, wall for people to have to get over. But if you ever have the opportunity to play this game, please do. I think you'll like it. And if you're in Minnesota ever, hit me up. We'll play it. I'll make it happen. Kingdom Death Monster currently has an 8.6 out of 10 rating based on 7.9 thousand ratings, ranking it as the 46th highest rated board game on Board Game Geek. And like I said, a new copy of it will set you back $400, $350 on Black Friday, and it can only be purchased directly from kingdomdeath.com. Okay, we had two really big-ass fat ones in a row, so let's have something a little more normal-sized. It's Jacob Freselius' Terraforming Mars. This was released in 2016 and set the world on fire. It was a huge deal when it came out. It was everywhere. People were freaking the fuck out about this game. And I knew I had to get my hands on it, my dirty little hands on it, and I did. And, you know, a lot of the time when a game comes out and sets the world on fire, I play it and I'm underwhelmed. But not with this one. So, as the title might infer to you, in this game, each player takes on the role of a huge corporation, all of whom are competing to terraform the planet Mars. Terraforming, of course, meaning like the process of making it habitable for human residence on the planet. So this is primarily through the creation of oceans and water on the surface of the planet, as well as forests, the raising of the planet's surface's temperature, as well as raising the level of oxygen in the atmosphere. The goal, basically, of the game, everybody is doing these things that will build forests, build oceans, raise the temperature, raise the oxygen, and once all of those things reach a level of minimum viability, it's not going to be fun to live there, but it is possible, then the game ends. The more you contribute to the terraforming process, that will earn you victory points, and then at the end of the game, the player who has the most victory points will win. It seems like fairly simple, when I say it like that, but it is endlessly complicated. The game is what is referred to as an engine building game, which is basically the idea of that you have all of these different sort of resources, and then you use certain resources to buy other things that build other resources and make more resources, and as you play the game, you build an engine, meaning that you set up a series of combos and things that will, increase and increase and increase, and it sort of snowballs until you've got all this shit going on, and by the end of the game, you've got this smooth operation that's moving forward. The primary... Let me show you the back of the box here. So, you've got your game board here, which is the map of Mars, and you're playing ocean and forest tiles as well as city tiles onto the board. But then in your own personal space, you've got this board here, which keeps track of the 6 different resources that you have. You have to keep track with cubes of how many of each resource you produce every turn, and then also a separate set of cubes keeps track of how many of those resources you have currently that you can spend. Then there is this massive ass fucking deck of cards. Comes with... How many does it come with? 233 cards in the base game. It's a lot of cards. And these cards are going to do various things. Some of them will be one-time actions that will give you some sort of bonus. Some of them will be cards that provide an action that you can take recurringly. Some of them will increase the production of a certain resource. Basically, all of these things to say are like how you're going to be building your engine. Like some of the other Euros that I mentioned before, player interaction is fairly minimal in this game. It is mostly about your hand of cards, your resources, trying to figure out how to build the best machine that's going to get you the most stuff the most quickly, and you're always racing against the clock because you're keeping track of that temperature going up, that oxygen level going up, and once those things reach their conclusion, the game's going to end. So you have to make everything happen before you reach that point. This game is very smart. It's the games like this, my favorite ones are like the great puzzle that you're trying to solve as you play, and it just really satisfies that part of my brain, very much so. Maybe not the best entry point into this hobby. I would say this game's a little on the heavy side. The rules are a little hard to understand. It's meant for more experienced players, I would say, generally. Whereas something like Dominion and Seven Wonders, which I mentioned earlier, those are great entry points. If you've never played any of these games, those are the ones that you want to start with, for sure. This game has had a good number of expansions in the 5 years since it came out. The first couple were pretty good, and then they did one where they introduced like politics, and it just is like this is now too many mechanics, and it's bogging down the core of the game, and I lost interest in getting any more of them, but I do have a couple. Also, that expansion came with plastic overlays for the cards so that you could keep the tokens in place when you're tracking everything, which is very helpful. So this is if you've played some games, if you're a moderate gamer and you haven't checked this one out, you definitely should. You definitely should, because it lives up to the hype. Terraforming Mars currently has an 8.4 out of 10 with 71,000 ratings on BoardGameGeek, ranking it as the number 4 overall best game according to the members of that site. and a new copy of it will run you $69.95 at your friendly local game store. Next, we have the other game that set the gaming world on fire in 2016, and it's bigger, but it's not as big. It's Scythe, designed by Jamie Stegmaier. So Scythe is what's referred to as a 4X game. It is a game set in a alternate history, sort of steampunk, early 20th century Europe, where, you know, everything is sort of like, you know, Eastern European peasant world, but then there's also giant mechs. Right? Sounds pretty cool, right? So each player takes on a various faction, which have, you know, slightly different rules and ways of playing, but the core sort of game is all the same. And there's a map, and you've got people on the map that you move around, and you've got mechs that you can build and then deploy on the map, and you can use the mechs to fight, but the fighting's not super consequential. It looks like it's going to be a war game, like a Risk type game, but it's not. It's secretly much more than that. Basically, it combines a couple of really good. It takes a bunch of ideas from a bunch of other games and combines them in a way that is very smart and very unique and very cool. So you've got like worker placement / action drafting type mechanics where you have a board where there are sort of like 4 choices of thing you can do on your turn, and you have to take a pawn and put it on the one that you want to do, and then on your next turn you have to pick a different one than the one that you picked last time. And so the sort of core of the game is going to be like you've got workers, you're placing your workers on the board so that they can harvest resources. You're using the resources to build buildings or upgrade things or build more workers or build mechs. And then, you know, as you play through the game, there are a series of like sort of like achievements. Think of them like achievements, where there's like 10 different sort of achievements in the game, and they can be like play all your workers onto the board. It's basically like do every single mechanic in the game, do it to its logical conclusion. Build all of the 4 buildings you can build. Build all of the 4 mechs you can build. You know, raise this stat to its highest level. And then there are win combat, and you can do that one 2 times. The first player to achieve 6 of the 10 possible achievements wins the game. It is so efficient and smart and just tickles my brain in such a great way, where it's like every single thing that you can do directly correlates to one specific goal. And since there are 10 goals and you only need 6 of them to win, you can kind of tailor your play towards the things that you like. Do you like, you know, more resource management? You can focus on that. Do you like, you know, maximizing your certain stats? You can do that. Do you want to work on area control and management? You can do that. Do you want to fight? You can do that. It's very interesting. It's a very fun game. The theming is super cool. The art and stuff is just absolutely beautiful. The minis are great. I love this game enough that I invested in getting the metal coins for the money, and then getting the realistic resources, which are like little 3D, modeled, like almost like clay modeled for the resources and stuff, instead of just like cardboard or wood chits, which just really makes the game like so much more cool and fun to play and feels more awesome. There are 3 expansions for this game. The first one adds 2 additional factions to the game and allows it to be played by up to, I believe, 7 players at the full limit. And then there's a second small expansion that is called the Wind Gambit that adds a new mechanic that are airships, which do various interesting things. And then there's a third, bigger expansion that I have not yet played that has a number of small modular expansions that you can choose to add or not add to the game, and then it also introduces a campaign mode to play as well. This game is very cool, very fun. Don't let it deceive you into thinking that it's a war game. It is not, but it is very, very fun. A lot of people think it's overhyped. I am not one of those people. Jamie Stegmaier, who made it, is a very talented and incredible game designer, and this is my favorite of his games. This game currently has an 8.2 out of 10 based on 62,000 ratings on Board Game Geek, ranking it number 14 overall in the all-time games list. A new copy of it at your local game store will run you $90. Next, we've got another big one. I told you I like big, epic, maximalist things, and this one is Millennium Blades. You may notice here that it says Collusion Expansion. The core game of Millennium Blades is big, but it is not this big. There are a number of expansions for Millennium Blades, most of which are fairly small. And then there was a somewhat larger one called Set Rotation. And then last year they did a Kickstarter for the final expansion, which was the biggest expansion yet. It was a very big expansion. And then they shipped it with this big-ass box, and then a second, also big-ass box, because if you have everything that they've printed for the game, you can fit all of it in one box of this size. And if you decide to sleeve the game, put sleeves on the cards, then you will need both. You can fit it in the two boxes. I did not sleeve it. I just have it in the one box. I do sleeve a lot of my games, but this game, it is too much. It is too much to sleeve. It would be insane and unwieldy to try and sleeve it and to try and play it while it is sleeved, in my opinion. I don't know the exact number of cards, but with the core game is like 600 cards. Set Rotation and Collusion are both like 400 cards, and then there are 10 small expansions that are like 50 to 100 cards. It's probably like close to 2,000 cards in that box. The game is basically just cards. You have a couple of neoprene mats that you use, and some chits, some cardboard tokens, but it is largely just cards. But it is very big and expensive and heavy because there are just so many of them. And so what is Millennium Blades, you may ask? Well, let me tell you. The game Millennium Blades is about you play as a group of people who play the game Millennium Blades. In the world of the game, Millennium Blades is a extremely popular and ubiquitous collectible card game. Think Magic the Gathering, think Pokemon, think Yu-Gi-Oh!, etc. The game is basically the process of going to a tournament, a booster draft tournament, basically, and playing 3 rounds of this game. But how the game works is you start at the beginning of the game with what basically amounts to as what they call a pre-constructed deck in the world of collectible card games, which you would buy at a game store for $10 or $15. It comes with a couple rare cards, and it has everything in it you need to play the game, but you're not going to win a tournament with a pre-constructed deck. You need to buy booster packs to get more cards to make your deck better. So, each round of Millennium Blades begins with a sort of phase of the game that takes place over the course of 20 real-world minutes that you time with a timer, where there is a store of cards. You select from, there's a core set that you play with in every game, and then there are tons and tons and tons of expansion sets of various rarity and value that you add into this big ass pile of cards that you play that's randomized every time you play the game. And basically, you will have a set amount of money. And one thing, normally paper money in a game, not great. I don't like it. But in this one, they have the paper money in stacks of 10 bills that's banded together, like stacks of bills from a bank that you get to like throw down. They have weight to them and stuff, and it's very fun and feels very fun and thematic because these cards are fucking expensive, right? So you're throwing down these big stacks of cash. So you have basically 20 minutes where there's a store of packs, which are face-down cards, which have a cost on the back of them. And each pack is, you're basically just, the rare is the one that is important. And that's the only card on the back. So you're buying random cards, which they have like a store value for the pack. Once you flip it over, it has a different value on the back that's based on how powerful the card actually is. So like playing Magic in real life, you can spend $5 on a pack and get a $1 card or a $100 card, right? It's completely up to chance. So you're buying cards. You have to take those cards and construct a deck of a limited number of cards. I can't remember. I think it's 12 cards or something like that. And there are, all sorts of different. There's colors. There's a number of colors, and then there's a number of card types, and they interact in interesting ways. So you're having to sort of keep track of what you have and how the cards are going to interact, and maximize the part where you actually play. You can trade with other players. You have a stack of cards that's your binder of rares that you can look through each other's binders and try and come up with trades. You can sell cards back to the aftermarket and take cash, which then you can use to buy more packs or other cards from the aftermarket. And then other players can buy cards from the aftermarket to add to their decks. There's every round a sort of metagame card, which is sort of a play on how there is always sort of themes and styles of play that are predominant and popular at any given time when you play card games like this. So that will give you bonuses for having cards of a certain color or of a certain type in the deck. And the cards themselves are all like parody, homage, pastiche to tons of different nerd pop culture stuff. You've got one that's all 007 cards. You've got one that's anime maids with rubber ducks. You've got Voltron. You've got Indiana Jones. You've got H.P. Lovecraft. Everything you can think of. There's so many. And, I've played this game a number of times, maybe like 10 times, and I've not even come close to seeing everything that this game has to offer, because there's just so many, and you only play with maybe like, once you've got all of them, you're playing with 10%, 15% of the total cards every time you play the game, but that makes it so that it's always fresh. You're always having to think on your feet. You can't go in with a set plan. You have to adapt and, work on the fly, and you're always operating under pressure because there's a timer that is counting down, and you have to be ready by the time that timer ends. And once that timer ends, then you actually play the game. And the game is fairly simple. You play out, everyone takes turns and plays one card per turn in a tableau, a series of cards. You play each one in succession to the right of the one that you played previously, and most of them will either give you points or interact with other cards to give you points, or flip cards or to make them unusable, or flip other players' cards, or there's a lot. But the core of the game is that when you're playing that game, you're trying to get points. And then at the end, each player is awarded victory points for the more overarching game based on what place they came in that game. and then in each of the three, you play 3 rounds in the tournament, and the victory points are higher, the stakes are higher with each successive game. And then during the trading phase, you'll also be getting victory points for doing things like building collections of cards that are of either the same color or the same type, but all have a different value, star value on them. And then the more cards you put in each collection, the more victory points you get. And so that incentivizes you having to sort of navigate and trade and have that second thing you're thinking about when you're trying to build your deck on top of everything else. This is just a frantic game of, like, trying to juggle 7 things at the same time, and it's so much fun. You're always like, what? This does what? Or you, like, read something and you're like, holy shit, that would work perfectly with this other thing, and like, having to, change your win condition on the fly, and trying things out and seeing if they'll work and seeing if they'll stick. And it's so funny. And what it really does, because I played a lot of Magic when I was young. I loved playing Magic a lot, going to tournaments and everything. The thing that has kept me out of the hobby from going back to it is the price. It's a very expensive hobby. It's a very expensive hobby. And what Millennium Blades does is it very accurately recreates the sort of sensation and fun and excitement of doing something like a booster draft, but you don't have to actually do the booster draft. And I love that about it. This game is maybe one of the less popular and less acclaimed. I think it's probably the lowest ranked game out of all the games that are on this list, but I do dearly, dearly, dearly love it, and I have everything that they've ever made for it. I have all the expansions, everything. I love it that much, and I play it every chance I get. It's again not for everyone. I think that if you never played something like Magic, it might be a little foreign to you. I've played it with people who hadn't really played Magic, and it didn't always go over super well with them. But if you are like me and you used to play CCGs, I think you would really enjoy this game. It's quite a lot of fun, and it's not very serious either, which is always fun too. Millennium Blades has an average rating of 7.7 out of 10 with 4,000 ratings, putting it rank as number 364 on the list of all-time greatest games on Board Game Geek. The core game and the expansions are currently out of stock, out of print. I would assume that they will probably reprint it in the semi-near future. And when it is in print, the core game will run you $79.99 at your local game store. In the meantime, you can always find a secondhand copy. Looks like on Board Game Geek, there are some, not many. There are none in North America at the moment, so it might be a little hard to get your hands on at the moment. But, games come back in print all the time, so you never know. Next, the game that would be probably my number 2 of all time, and just by a hair. I love this game very, very deeply. It is the 4th edition of Twilight Imperium. And this is, again, a huge-ass fucking monstrosity of a box that I'm not going to hold up for the entire time I talk about it, because it weighs too much. So, Twilight Imperium was, in its first edition, published in the late 90s, and it was then, second edition was in 2000, third edition was in 2003, and then they didn't do the 4th edition until 2017. So when I first started playing Twilight Imperium, I was playing the 3rd edition. Twilight Imperium was kind of the backbone product of the game company Fantasy Flight Games, which is a company that originated and is based out of Minnesota. They sort of grew into one of the biggest game companies in the world. They were eventually acquired by Asmodee Games, which is a huge board game conglomerate, and then the Asmodee North America offices took over the Fantasy Flight offices basically, and they are located in Roseville, Minnesota, about a block and a half away from the Half Price Books where I used to work. And the campus also featured a store called the Fantasy Flight Game Center, which is a very large board game store and play area for group play, as well as a restaurant where you could get beer and food to eat and nosh on while you play. Fantasy Flight was also... So the founder of Fantasy Flight and the designer of this game, Christian Peterson, eventually became the CEO of Asmodee North America. But then when he left the company a couple years ago, he no longer works for Asmodee and Fantasy Flight, but then he ended up buying the Fantasy Flight game store from Asmodee and rebranded it. It is now called Game Center with a Z. Terrible name. But it is functionally basically exactly the same as it used to be, and it is in the same location, in the same office park where the Asmodee and Fantasy Flight offices are located. And it is generally the place I go to play board games with people. I went there this previous Saturday, but they were having a tournament for the Lord of the Rings card game, so there was no tables available, so we ended up playing at a different game store called The Source. But it's the go-to place to go play board games. You can get poutine and burgers and beer and Coke and whatever, and they have a huge selection of games in their game library that you can play for free, and it's open pretty late most days. It's open until like 10 p.m., 11 p.m., except on Sundays. It's a great place to go. But so Christian Peterson founded Fantasy Flight, basically. He was publishing comics originally, and then he designed Twilight Imperium and published that, and then it became this massive board game success. They're the people who make all the Star Wars games, and they made the Battlestar Galactica game, and they made the StarCraft board game, and they made a bunch of Warhammer board games, and they've just done a ton of shit. So what is Twilight Imperium? Twilight Imperium is a epic space fantasy opera type game where there is this galaxy with many different races of alien creatures. Think Mass Effect, right? But predating Mass Effect. And this sort of galaxy, this galactic republic, was ruled for many years by this race called the Lazax, who their base of operations was this planet at the center of the galaxy called Mechatol Rex. Again, think Coruscant from Star Wars. But after a long war that lasted for centuries, the Lazax have been all but eradicated. The Empire has fallen, and now all of the remaining races are vying for political control to be the supreme leaders of the galactic empire. And that is where the game begins. Each player takes on the role of a different race, who all have a different sort of style of play. They each have specific rules that govern the way that they play and change your strategies. Some of them are really good at fighting. Some of them are really good at making technology. Some of them are really good at doing politics. It's a very big, very complicated, very long game. It's notorious for being one of the biggest, longest, most complicated games that you can play. You can play it with 3 to 6 players with the base game. With the expansion, they did finally release an expansion for the 4th edition, which adds the ability to play with up to 8 players. If you're playing a 3-player game, you can expect it to take anywhere from 4 to 6 hours. However, if you are brave enough to play With 8 players, expect that to be more in the 12-plus hour range, probably taking place over more than one day. Most of the time when I play this game, I'm playing it with 4 or 5 people, and it takes like 6 to 8 hours to play a game. The last time I went to GameholeCon, the main thing that I was doing every day I was there, I played a game of Twilight Imperium, and it was like 6 to 8 hours to play. I played 3 games of Twilight Imperium, and I won 2 of them. Fuck off. So the game is sort of like, there's a huge ass board of all of these planets that are sort of taken from it's randomly arranged. It's actually drafted at the beginning of the game. People draft and pick where the planets go so that, it keeps it more balanced so that, people don't wind up with a ton of good resources right next to them. And you can also, put good stuff that you have next to you and then put bad stuff to block your opponents, etc. So, you start out on your home planets with, some ships and infantry. It's not dissimilar from something like Axis and Allies, where there's a bunch of different, possible figures, pieces of plastic that you can put on the board. You've got ground troops, you've got little fighters, you've got carrier ships that will carry your fighters and your ground troops. You've got fast little ships that can zip around really quickly. You've got bigger ships that are good for fighting. You've got your big ass thing that looks like a Star Destroyer. You've got a thing that's very hard to build and very powerful called a War Sun that is just straight up a Death Star. And so you start moving out into the galaxy, dropping your people onto the different planets, taking control of them. Each planet provides you with resources and political power. And the resources, of course, you will use to build more ships and things on the board. And every round, there's a selection of 8 different action tiles. You will draft them. Each player will pick one. And basically, they will, on your turn, you can either do one of the general actions or you can choose to activate your thing, which allows everyone at the same time to do the action on it, but whoever picks it gets a bonus for having picked it, basically. And that's going to be how you research technology, which will unlock new abilities or upgrade certain figures on the board to make them more powerful. There's ones for building space stations, which will allow you to relocate where you can put your stuff on the board. There's space cannons, PDS, they're called, a planetary defense system, which will sort of auto-shoot at anything that gets too close to you. You've got cards for that will give you more what are referred to as command tokens, which are the thing that you use to move your people around the board. And they also can be used to increase the maximum size of your fleet, which is how many ships you can have on one space at a time. This game is very deep, very complicated. There's a lot going on, a lot of moving parts, a lot of things you have to remember. And it's also highly political. You're going to make alliances, you're going to stab people in the back. It's just bound to happen. And then, of course, at the center of the galaxy, there's Mechatol Rex. And so there's a King of the Hill element to the game where everybody's sort of vying to get to Mechatol Rex because it's worth an incredible amount of resources. And then also one of the cards you can draft every turn, if you get the 8th card, it will automatically get you a victory point if you control Mechatol Rex. And the first player to get 10 victory points wins the game. And so, like I said, it's a 6 to 8 hour game, and you're only playing to 10, so each victory point is a lot. So getting that victory point is a big deal. So if you get to Mechatol Rex and you can get that fucking card, that's a big deal. And so everybody else is trying to stop you. Then after all of that, then there's a politics phase where a player who is the speaker, which the speaker is determined by someone drafting the politics card earlier in the round. The speaker will pull from a huge-ass deck of agendas, which are laws that will change the rules of the game permanently in various ways. And then all other players will use their planets. The planets have a resource value, but they also have a political value, and each political point is worth 1 vote. And so then each player will go around and vote yay or nay on each law, and if it passes, then it is enacted, and in the case of a tie, the speaker breaks the tie. It's a lot. I know, it's a lot. But there's nothing else like it. Just the epic, incredible scope of it is just so fun. And it's like, it's very long, but it goes by so fast. Like I said, they recently published the first expansion for the game, and I was able to play that expansion for the first time with my Questy Boys friends mentioned earlier, who are all very big fans of Twilight Imperium as well, and is great fun. Introduces a number of new mechanics. It introduces a new mech unit that's a ground force. Introduces leaders, which are like individual like tokens for each race that have special abilities that you can unlock as you play the game that do cool things. There's like a ton of new laws that it adds to the game. It allows you to play with up to 8 players, etc., etc. So this game, again, not for everyone. It is very big, it is very long, it is very expensive. The base game will run you $150, and the expansion will run you an additional $100. But if you like stuff like Mass Effect, if you like space opera, epic stuff, and lore and world building stuff in sci-fi, there's just mountains of it to be had here. From there's the iconic on the cover. You've got front and center. You've got the most famous race, the Emirates of Hakan, who are lovingly referred to as the Space Cats. They are a race of cat people who are all about money. They're the big capitalists of the world, and so their race is all about trade and trade goods and doing trade with other people and making everyone happy. You've got the Soul, who are basically like human space marines. Right here, you can kind of see them, is the Universities of Jolnar, which are a race of fish people that live in glass bubbles who are incredibly good at technology. And so you start out with a bonus on your tech, and you can research tech much faster and more easily than all the other races. Over here, you've got, what are these guys called? The Sardak Nor, that are like plant creatures that just eat people. And they're really good at fighting. Over here, you've got the Chichicha, which people refer to as the Peace Turtles. There's a Twilight Imperium podcast called Space Cats Peace Turtles. That's very good. You've got the Barony of Letnev. Over here, you've got the Lazaks, which are like a cyborg. They're like the Borg from Star Trek, basically. There are 18 races in the core box, and then an additional 8 or 10 more in the expansion. It's just so much. You can probably tell that I like my games big and chunky and over the top. And this is one of the biggest, chunkiest, over-the-top ones. And every time I play it, it is such a joy. It just gives me so much passion and love in my heart. Like I said, the base game will cost you a cool $150 at your friendly local game store. And the 4th edition that I have here is rated an 8.7 out of 10 with 15,000 ratings on Board Game Geek, ranking it as number 6 overall on the all-time rankings list. Next, we've got one that people would probably call big if I wasn't throwing around shit like Twilight Imperium and Gloomhaven and Kingdom Death. It is Nemesis, published by Awakened Realms, designed by Adam Kwapinski. This came out in 2018 and was a huge success on Kickstarter, raised $5 million. So, have you ever liked the movie Alien? Well, this game is Alien, except that legally it's not Alien. But in every way other than the name Alien, it's Alien the board game. You play as a crew of people on board the spaceship Nemesis. You wake up from cryosleep to find that one of your fellow crew members has been killed by some sort of monster, which is now hiding in the vents, breeding and reproducing. At the beginning of the game, every player is given 2 objectives, one personal objective and one corporate objective. Shortly into the game, you will have to pick which one you choose to be your goal. And so on paper, the game is cooperative, but every player has a different condition for their victory, and sometimes that condition can be player 3 has to die. So it's not really a cooperative game. It's not a hidden role traitor game like something like Mafia or Werewolf either, though. It's much more nuanced than that. So you wake up on this ship. You need to figure out where the ship is going. You do that by going to the front of the ship, to the bridge, and checking. You need to figure out if the engines are working. You need to do that by going to all the way at the other end of the ship and checking the 3 engines and seeing if at least 2 of them are working. So at the beginning of the game, you're going to be like, okay, well, someone needs to go up front and see where we're going, because we need to be going back to Earth. But what if the person that you sent up there, their goal is that the ship needs to go to Jupiter, and then they need to escape from an escape pod? Well, and then what if the person you send to the back of the ship to fix the engines decides to sabotage the engines instead? You don't know. There are tons of rooms on the ship that all do different things, and they're randomized every time you play, so you don't know where anything is, and you don't know what you're getting into when you enter a room. You could be entering a shower room, you could be entering the egg nest where the queen lives. This game is very hard and very mean, very brutal, but thematically it is incredible. The stories that you get from playing this game, this is a masterpiece of emergent storytelling, where there isn't really much in the way of like flavor text or anything that creates a narrative. It's entirely a narrative that is created by the choices that you make. Like the moment where you are like, follow me, I'm going to get us out of here, and then you lock the door behind someone and leave them in a room with an alien to die. There's also the, fighting the aliens is possible. It's not very advisable, but, if you successfully fight one and kill it is an incredible rush. There's also moments like the self-destruct has been activated and you need to get off the ship, and then you get to the escape pods, and as soon as you get there, an alien appears and stops you from getting in, and then your friend who's in the pod already decides, I'm not going to wait for you, and then they jettison the escape pod and leave you to your death. This game, I think it has things about it that I think can turn people off extremely hard. Social engineering, lying, deceiving. Not everybody likes that. It can be very mean, which some people can take personally. It does have player death and elimination, which has the downside of you might die and then the game might keep going for another hour afterwards. It does have a mechanic to somewhat counterbalance that, where the first player to die can then take control of the aliens, and their win condition becomes having no one else win the game, and then if that happens, then they win, which is kind of fun. But the aliens are super overpowered, and it's more of a good idea than it actually is good in practice. And then also it's very expensive. So this game has a ton of alien miniatures, plastic miniatures that are very big and imposing to give a lot of weight and scale and epicness and excitement to the aliens when they appear. And then also there's stuff that's plastic pieces that could have been cardboard, places where corners could have been cut. But Awakened Realms is a game company known for very lavish and over-the-top production value in their games, so they choose not to. Because of that, this game will cost you $150, and the expansions will run you around $70 to $100 a piece. Personally, I don't think you need any of the expansions. I think that you can get plenty out of this game and its core box. I backed this on Kickstarter, and so I got some of the expansions for free as bonuses for being a Kickstarter backer. And most of the expansions that have been released just are a different type of alien that behaves in a slightly different way from the aliens in the core game, which is cool, but not totally necessary. I think if you like thematic games, if you like horror, if you like having stories and experiences like that with your friends, if that's what you enjoy about gaming, you're going to like this game a lot. It's a lot less about, being a puzzle that you need to solve, and a lot more about having an experience and telling a story with your friends. That's very fun and exciting. And so, if that's your thing, Nemesis is the way to go. It is great. There are other things like it. They are not as good. There are games that are officially licensed Alien products. None of them captures the spirit and feeling and excitement and dread of that film the way that Nemesis does. It is amazing. Like I said, Nemesis will run you a cool $150. It currently has an 8.4 out of 10 rating with 16,000 ratings, placing it at number 20 on the overall top games of all time list on BoardGameGeek. We will end with one that seems smaller, but don't let the box deceive you. This is one of the biggest, most complicated, crunchy, mean, awful, hilarious, stupid games ever made. It is Food Chain Magnate from the lovely Dutch gentlemen at Splatterspellen Games. The modern way to old-fashioned good gaming. Lemonade. They want lemonade? What is the world coming to? I want commercials for burgers on all channels every 15 minutes. We are the home of the original burger, not a hippie health haven. And place a billboard next to that new house on the corner. I want them craving beer every second they sit in their posh new garden. The new management trainee trembles in front of the CEO and tries to politely point out that, how do you mean? We don't have enough staff. The HR director reports to you, hire more people, train them, but whatever you do, don't pay them real wages. I did not go into business so I could become poor. And fire that discount manager. She's only costing me money. From now on, we'll sell gourmet burgers. Same crap, double the price. Get my marketing director in here. Food Chain Magnate is a heavy strategy game about building a fast food chain. The focus is on building your company using a card-driven human resource management system. Players compete on a variable city map through purchasing, marketing, and sales, and on a job market for key staff members. The game can be played by 2 to 5 serious gamers in 2 to 4 hours. So Splatterspellen is like I said, a Dutch company that has existed since the late 90s and specializes in publishing these sort of niche, very complicated, very intense games that have a very cult following, and they're printed in very small print numbers, so they're fairly expensive because they don't make a ton of them. And they sort of existed as sort of a cult thing for, almost 20 years, and then they made this game, Food Chain Magnate, and it kind of blew up in a way that none of their other games really had. They still function in the same way, where they print it like once a year in fairly small quantities, and it sells out instantly, and it's still very expensive. And it's hard to get your hands on. This game came out in 2015, and then in 2018, I was at a game store and saw it, and had come there to buy a specific thing, put that thing back and did not buy it so I could get Food Chain Magnate, because I knew if I didn't get it, then I was like, it wasn't going to happen. So, the game, if you didn't catch on, is sort of a satire of capitalism in America and American culture, and it's got this great sort of like fake 50s, clip art style that really serves the theme of the game very well. It takes place with a modular board of a town with houses and streets on it where you can build restaurants, and the restaurants can serve various things. You can sell burgers, you can sell beer, you can sell pop, you can sell lemonade, and you can sell pizza. And you need to advertise with billboards mostly, and radio advertisements, and then you can also do like airplane skywriting advertisements and other things, and the advertisement will create a desire in the houses in their radius for a product, and if your place is the closest and cheapest thing serving that product, they are going to come to your store and give you their money. This will, of course, lead to insanity, where suddenly you've got, $30 cheeseburgers, and it's just stupid and hilarious and thematically very goofy, but the core of the game is very, very serious. In the rules, they tell you that if this is your first time playing with other people who have played before, you are going to lose. That is the way it's going to be, because it is a punishing and unforgiving game where if you fuck up, there is no catch-up mechanic. There is no plan B. If you fuck up, you are fucked. You will lose the game. It is just the way it is. Splatter prides themselves on games that have as little luck in them as humanly possible. Everything is as balanced as it can be, and whoever the best player is going to win the game every time. I like that about it a lot, but that also can turn people off. It's a very big and complicated and mean game. It's not friendly to new players at all. The majority of how you play the game is you start with a CEO, and there are tons of cards on the board in this sort of store that are basically employees, and what you have to do is you have to spend your money to hire people that you have to then keep spending money to pay their salary, and every round of the game you create basically a hand of cards that's a power structure where you've got cascading levels of management. Each manager can oversee a certain number of employees underneath it, so you have to basically pick cards out of your total employees to create this hand of cards that is a power structure of employees that you then play and then do all of the things that all of the cards do. But then you have to remember that even if you don't use a person, you still have to pay them, so you might want to fire them. And if you fuck up and make your power structure wrong, it will fuck you and you won't get to do the things that you want to do, and you will lose the game. It's very intense, and like games like this that I like, it's very like crunchy in all the right ways. The mechanics are very fun to figure out. It's like a puzzle that you get to solve. The other games that Splatter has made are very, maybe even more dense and intense, and not nearly as fun thematically and exciting. The thing I like about this game is that it's very dense and intense and Euro-y, but it's also thematically very fun and enjoyable and exciting. It's like the best of both worlds for me. Yeah, it's just such a silly game with such seriousness at its core, which I like too. like I said, this game is hard to get your hands on. They usually print it like once a year, maybe, and it's in pretty limited numbers when they do. When it does get printed, it will run you $120 for a copy, which is a lot for what it is. It is just cards and cardboard, but since they make it in such limited quantities, it makes the price higher. It's like it's a niche boutique kind of thing, but it is absolutely worth the money in my opinion. In times when it is not in print, it is not uncommon for it to cost $200 to $300 to get your hands on a used copy of it. So, I recommend picking it up when it is available. And Food Chain Magnate on Board Game Geek currently has a average rating of 8.1 out of 10 based on 15,000 ratings, ranking it as number 32 overall in the top games of all time. All right. This took longer than I was expecting, but that's okay. I hope this was mildly enjoyable for someone sometime. So yeah, thanks for watching. Thanks for sticking around and watching stuff, even though I'm not just doing books anymore. And I know a lot of people probably subscribed to me or started watching me because I was talking about books. You know, I got a lot of subscribers from, the collab video I did with Juan over at Plagued by Visions. So if you're still here and still watching, thank you. I appreciate it. And if you want to see more stuff like this, let me know in the comments. I don't know what else I would do in the world of board games, how I would make more content necessarily, but it's just something that I like a lot and I was thinking about, and so I thought, why not do a thing, right? Yeah. All right. Good night, everyone.